Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Lives Online Conversation 2021 Festival Edition. Join me, Kelly Devine, the Artistic Director, and Nina Strike, the Executive Director, in conversation with Fermin Rojas, the filmmaker behind the film King Philip's Belt, A Story of Wampum. This is a film that you can see as part of our in-person screenings, which begin September 21st and run through September 26th, as well as part of our virtual streaming section, which begins September 27th and runs through October 3rd. All the information regarding this film, King Philip's Belt, A Story of Wampum, and all of our other events at the upcoming Global Peace Film Festival can be found by visiting peacefilmfest.org. And now, please join me in welcoming Fermin. Thank you for taking the time today to speak with us.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly and Nina, for inviting me to participate in the conversation. It's an honor to be part of the Global Peace Film Festival again. And you guys do such terrific programming. I'm overjoyed that the film is part of the program this year.
And you are a returning filmmaker too. So we were thrilled to have had your film Alambrones in the festival a few years ago, and delighted to have King Philip's Belt, A Story of Wampum in this year's festival. So to start out, tell us about the film.
Well, the film is it's a short documentary, and it centers around the Wampanoag Native American population here on Cape Cod, where I live. I live in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where I have my film company. So this is where the colonists, or the pilgrims, as we commonly call them in the United States, landed. So there's a lot of history and interaction between the native population and the colonist population. So King Philip's Belt centers around the Mashpee and Aquinnah Wampanoag communities coming together for the first time in 350 years, or over 350 years, to weave a ceremonial wampum belt. Now, for people who don't know what a wampum belt is, wampum, first of all, are tiny little beads made from the quahog clamshell. And they're about yay big. And so the process of creating this new ceremonial wampum belt took close to 2 years in the making, from beginning to end. All the beads were made by local artisans in Aquinnah, on Martha's Vineyard. So it was two artisans who appear in the film, and it took them a year just to produce the bead. The belt, which is about 6.5 feet long and about 12 inches wide, has thousands and thousands of these beads. What's important about the belt as an artifact, both historically and as a new creation, is there was no written language for the Wampanoag population, for the Wampanoag Indian tribes. So a lot of the treaties and history of the tribe was all recorded in these ceremonial belts. In fact, as time would go by, when there were new treaties with other tribes or anybody, they would add pieces to these ceremonial belts. So that's the primary story in the film. The secondary underlying story is kind of a mystery. It's I don't want to say a whodunit, but there was a famous ceremonial wampum belt that was the property of a very famous sachem named Metacom, whose converted Christian name was King Philip. So King Philip interacted with the colonists in the late 17th century. So in 1676, after the colonists had broken many of the treaties that they had with the Wampanoags were fed up. And King Philip, as he was known, or as he's referred to in history, and his cousin Weetamoo, who was a sachem on her own, because most people don't know that Wampanoag society was matriarchal in nature to a great degree. So he and Weetamoo declared war on the colonists. And It's known as King Philip's War, and it was a very bloody war. It's considered to this date one of the bloodiest, if not the bloodiest, per capita battle or war that has been fought in North America, in what we know as the United States now. So his belt, after he was killed by the colonists, was allegedly shipped to the King of England, but it never arrived. So part of the film also is an exploration of where is this belt and what happened to it, and we investigate a little bit about what could have possibly, where it could have possibly ended up, and we do this by conversing with some very interesting scholars. The belt, watch the film. You'll have to watch the film to see if we found it or not. But what's very interesting is we get to learn a lot about the where a lot of these wampum artifacts ended up. In fact, part of the film is a visit to the British Museum in London, which ironically enough is where most of the surviving wampum artifacts remain. And we get in, part of what we delve into the film in a short period of time is the fact that there's a big movement now to repatriate a lot of these artifacts to their where they belong. They belong with their native population, the native owners where they were created. So it's a short film, and we cover a lot of ground in the construction of the belt, the process of creating the beads, what the significance of them is. And also we get to touch upon some of the more complicated and delicate parts of the story, which is the history of colonization in the United States and the abuse of native populations. So it's a short film, but it's jam-packed with information and a lot of emotional content. And it was an honor to be able to work with leaders of the Wampanoag community here on Cape Cod, and also to work with and interview historian Dr. March Bruchek, who is an expert in Native American artifacts. So the whole project was really a labor of love. The way it started was really, we were working with a company called Smoke Signals, which is run by Stephen Peters and his mother, Paula Peters, who is a Wampanoag historian. And we had been working with them to create some short pieces for museum exhibits that they do throughout the world. In fact, the new belt is currently on exhibit in the UK. And pieces of the film accompany the exhibit. So you walk up and hit a button and watch it on a kiosk. But I thought the story was so compelling that we took a lot of the material and edited it into a 20-minute film that I'm very happy to report most audiences that have watched it feel very moved by the whole story. They find it very moving and very compelling. And the question I always get at the end is, are you going to continue the story? And my answer is sure. If somebody wants to step up with more money, we'll continue to develop the story. So that's the gist of the film, and it covers a lot of interesting topics that I think are history that we haven't covered in schools and in the United States. So it's a glimpse into a broader picture of the very complicated relationship that existed between the native population and the colonists.
Well, and that's something I would really encourage for anyone listening who hasn't seen the film to seek the film out, is the nuance, but also there are often, or too often, stories about Native Americans in which their own agency is not really fully represented. And I think in your film, you demonstrate that not just historically, but, as a part of this reclamation project that they are taking to restore this particular folk way of theirs.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more moving components for me, there's a scene in the film where Paula Peters and another historian, Linda Coombs, were at the British Museum, and I get very moved talking about it. They're praying over the belts, over the different belts and wampum artifacts that are at the museum. And Paula says, this is perhaps the first time that these belts have heard other Wampanoag voices speaking to them. There is a belief in the Wampanoag community that the belts themselves are living beings. They are not imbued with energy or life, that they are living things themselves, because the materials that they're made of are complexes that come from nature. They come from it's made from the sinew, of the deer. It's made from the clamshells. It's made from creatures that live at the edge of the water, that come from the woods, which is intrinsically tied to and intrinsically tied to Native American, Wampanoag beliefs. And I don't want to speak on behalf of any Wampanoag person, because I am not Wampanoag, but I've been part of, researching the story with them and been included in an understanding of what these things are. So the importance of the belts themselves, hearing their own voices for the first time. And one of the hopes in the film is that by creating this new belt, it will call out to Metacom's original belt that was lost to history, and that somehow it would be found through the process, which to me is extremely, extremely moving, because it's living history. They're living artifacts. They're not inanimate objects to the Wampanoag Nation. And I think that is extremely, extremely important to know. And it's something that as a non-native person, I have no idea about these bits of information that to me are so poetic and rich, and we don't talk about them as part of history.
And Fermin, in your last answer, it seems as though you yourself went through a journey in the process of telling the story and learning about it. And could you talk about some of the things that you learned and that you are now carrying with you?
Yes. One of the most moving things for me was when we filmed at the powwow, one of the annual powwows in Mashpee, at the reservation, which is called 50 Acres, and not just the Wampanoag community, but other Native American tribes participate, and it was thousands of people gathered for this celebration of heritage and culture and food. And I was able to listen to the importance. I think it's important, particularly nowadays in the United States, where we're so polarized, to just be able to listen, really listen to what's important to people from different walks of life. For me, it was a journey in not only on the King Philip Belt project, but other projects that we worked on with Smoke Signals, with Paula, and with Stephen, and with Linda Coombs and March Bruchak, is I got to learn history about my adoptive country. I'm not Native American, born in the United States. I'm Cuban. So it was very interesting for me to learn a history that I wouldn't have otherwise known had I not been privileged enough to be a part of these projects. And that for me was extremely moving. Also, to learn how difficult it must have been to create these artifacts or these important documents. I like to call the belt a document because it's really a historical document. And even with today's technology, you see in the film how to make the beads, they're grinding them on these electric grinders and saws. And like one of the artisans says, you know, I've got plenty of bloody fingers to prove it. But take a step back to 1600s, and how did you create these tiny little beads? And there are different theories on how they were created, that they were strung up on sinew, and then they would be rolled on stones. So for me, the most profound thing was learning about all this history and how much of the person, you know, your soul. These artisans really put their souls into making these living documents that tell a history of a people, and also are part of the I don't want to necessarily say religious, but it's part of the spiritual center of the community. That for me was extremely moving. Because, you know, like, as I said, I was born in Cuba, and in Cuba, the native population got wiped out completely by the Spaniards. There's very few traces left of indigenous population in Cuba, except you see it in the faces of people, you know, because the genetics have been passed down. So it resonated a lot with the history of my own country. I think any country who has a history of having been colonized will be able to identify with the film and to deal with the abuses of the past. I think that's some of what we need to. The film also, for me, I think film has a great power to tell stories in very disarming ways, and I think the film is it's an easy step into having a dialogue about very difficult topics, about colonization, about appropriation, about what we can do nowadays to fix the storytelling, if nothing else. You know, Thanksgiving is coming up in the next couple of months, and boy, talk about a story that doesn't get told, right? That's some of the other projects we've worked on, was a lot of the history of the Pilgrims' interaction with the Wampanoags, and it's not the story, it's not the literally whitewashed story that we get in school. Very complicated.
Very complicated. And Fermin, when you said telling the uncomfortable stories and dealing with some of the more uncomfortable incidents in our shared past, that has been a theme that has come up in a number of the films that we've programmed this year. And I think I wanted to underline the importance of that as a part of our mission, which is to, you know, certainly to bring people models and ideas to take into their own lives and communities to make the world a more just and peaceful place, to take action. But it's also about learning in greater depth and with as much nuance as possible about the complexities of the culture that we all find ourselves a part of as citizens. And having, you know, if you could talk about, you know, how that knowledge, you know, is helpful in moving forward.
Well, as an example, you know, I was talking about how we don't explore the colonist-native relationship very in depth. One of the things that I left out, that I cut out of the film, was a retelling of what happened to Metacom once they captured him and killed him. They beheaded him, and they stuck his head on a spike outside Plymouth Plantation, along with Weedamu's head, for 10 years. The colonists were not this enlightened, you know, persecuted religious sect that, oh, woe is me. They inflicted the same same persecution that they had experienced. They came here and inflicted upon the native population tenfold. And when we talk about, you know, educating and owning our past, these are difficult conversations to have. and so, you know, I think we need to, what's useful about the film is to, again, start dialogues about what happened, what really happened, and what were the repercussions of those interactions that continue to trickle down throughout history, and even to this day, continue to inform who we are as a nation. If we don't explore where the foundations came from, you know, it's like building a house. If we didn't set the right foundations to begin with, yes, the house may work really well for a long time, but eventually it starts to creak and get out of alignment. And I think to a degree, that's where we are today in the United States. We are having to have a recalibration and taking a look at our roots and how government was set up. You know, and another thing that we cover, not specifically in this film, but that I learned as part of the process, the Wampanoags had a very intricate social system. They had a very intricate political system. They had rotation cropping down to a science. And so much of this information was lost. It was all about, oh, the colonists came in with all their wonderful modern technology and muskets and copper kettles, which everybody benefited from. But we don't talk about all the very intricate and useful and sophisticated systems that were already in place here with the native population. And in fact, some historians claim that a lot of components of how we set up our constitution were based on some of the structural government, the government structures that the native populations already had in place.
That is so interesting. There's so much to learn from our history and from the history that is not taught in schools. So
yeah.
We thank you.
My hope is that this is as exciting to other people as it is to me to learn, really learn all of the different components. If nothing else, my hope is that the film will pique everybody's interest into learning more and researching more and having a greater understanding of the great contributions that were already here in place with Native Americans who were the occupants of this land and who treated it with respect and in commune. You know, for example, the hunting of deer, every part of the deer was used, every part, nothing went to waste, because otherwise, you know, the life had not been honored. And you know, I wish that Stephen or Paula had been able to participate today so they could speak more to this. But I think that's more than anything for me. I hope the film inspires people to learn more about our history in this country.
Yes, so we certainly agree with you. And so how can people watching this and people watching the film, what can they do? How can they support this work?
Yeah, so I mean, my hope is to you know, if anybody's watching who is a teacher or works in a, you know, in any kind of education, please contact me. We would love to make the film available to you. But even if that's not the case, if you want to have screenings of the film privately, we're happy to arrange that as well. If you want to get together with a group of friends and watch this and say, hey, you know, or show it to your children, we'll happily make the film available on a platform. We're in the, you know, the challenge with any film is getting distribution. So we're seeking, more than anything, I think, educational distribution for this movie. I think it should be part of every curriculum in every school, teaching, you know, teaching early American history or New England history, you know, at least. So also learn about, you know, if you're not in the Northeast, learn about your local Native American population with their history and how they were affected. And there's so much richness to it, and different parts of the country had, you know, the the Wampanoags were known for their intricate and beautiful wampum jewelry and wampum ceremonial belts. Other parts of the country were known for their beading, which rivaled the beading of of any other country. So learn more about your local native history and embrace it and demand that your schools teach it. I think we need to demand that schools, there's this whole, not to jump onto another subject, with a lot of the what do they call it, the critical race theory. We need to do a deep dive into learning American history with all its components, good, bad, and ugly, because only then I think can we have a more whole understanding of who we are as a nation. And I think this film, this little simple film, is a good fire starter to think about these topics. It's a heartwarming film. And we get to meet these wonderful artisans who speak very eloquently about Wampanoag culture and what it means to them to be Wampanoag. One fellow in the film, who is one of the bead makers, who doesn't, you look at him, he's a blonde, blue-eyed guy, and he says, "I look like a white person on the outside, but I am a Wampanoag person. And my father taught me how to do wampum jewelry, kicking and screaming, and it defines who I am." So it's a film that can help all of us think about who we really are and what is our identity. I don't know if any of this makes any sense to anybody else, but it makes sense to me, so I thought I'd share it with you.
Well, thank you. We love hearing it's just wonderful, and love your enthusiasm about the film, and it's inspiring to to others to not only watch the film but do something about what they've seen. So finally, what's next for you and your production company?
So we're working on a couple of really great things. One is a narrative film, which is written by a very talented new emerging LGBTQ writer. His name is Marco Calvani, and he's written a beautiful film called Best Place in the World, which is a gay love story set in Provincetown, which will be shot completely on location here, hopefully next year. But it's from the point of view of a Brazilian immigrant who is here and falls in love with an African-American man. So again, we're doing a deep dive into race and immigrant, the immigrant story, and what, how that can be a very complex issue, even in a place like Provincetown, which is known for being such an eclectic and inclusive place. We're then also working on a documentary about a small cafe that operated in New York from 1958 to 1968 called the Cafe Chino. And it was run by this Italian gay man who had wanted to be a ballet dancer, but he was too heavy to be a ballet dancer. So he opened this cafe, which is credited with being the birth of off-Broadway theater. And it is also credited with being the birthplace of openly gay themed plays. And it launched the careers of Sam Shepard, Lanford Wilson, Bernadette Peters, amongst a host of others. And a good number of the people that participated in the Chino are still alive today. And we're very excited to work on that project because it's again, talk about, it's part of the, it's an important piece of LGBTQ history that has been it's been documented in academia, but it has not been properly presented to the general public. So I want to honor Joe Chino's contribution to the world and let everybody know who this man was. I'm surprised we don't have a statue of him in the village celebrating his contribution to the world. And he did it without any money, on a shoestring budget, and changed the way that theater functions in the United States. So we're very excited. Oh, and one more, big one. We're working on a documentary titled The Elephant Corridor, which is about using the technology of bee pheromones to redirect elephant migration away from populated areas. And that's been about a year and a half in pre-production and development. And we're, of course, COVID made everything take, I don't know how much longer, but it's taken a lot longer. So those are some really interesting projects that we're working on, and very relevant projects. We are, our philosophy, our mantra at DKR Films is to create films that entertain, but also ignite the imagination and have social consciousness to them. So hopefully all three projects will serve that purpose. And we hope we'll certainly be back to knocking on your door to be part of the festival when we come through with these projects.
Well, thank you so much, Fermin. We will certainly answer that knock when we hear it at our door, and we'll be following your progress in the meantime. Please send us updates, and we will push them out via our Global Peace Film Festival social media channels. So, and thank you for taking such time and care to talk about these issues behind the film King Philip's Belt, A Story of Wampum. We really appreciate it. For those of you who listen to this interview and would like to learn more or to ask a question directly, please use the following email, info@dkrfilms.com. That's info@dkrfilms.com. And again, please check out the Global Peace Film Festival website, peacefilmfest.org, to learn all of the details about our upcoming in-person screenings and virtual screenings. Thank you so much. We'll see you at the next Glow.